welcome to Wednesday Wandering with me, Kate Field. Wandering about stuff, not just wandering off. This is the place to explore creativity, inspiration, and the deeper rhythms of an artistic life. Welcome, I really hope you are well. Today, I've been thinking about beginnings. Not those, not the big dramatic beginnings, not the grand unveiling, the perfect opening line, the flash of brilliance. No, I've been thinking about the beginnings that are slower, that are softer, a little uncertain. The kind of beginning that comes after wintering, for example, tentative, quiet, almost imperceptible. And as we step into April, the seasons diverge depending on where we live. So I'm in the Northern Hemisphere in southwest England, and spring is reaching out slowly and gently. Lovely birdsong this morning, and some really brave blossoms actually. My pear tree is just about to come in. In the southern hemisphere, obviously, it is autumn with the light slanting lower and the leaves beginning to fall. Spring or autumn, both are seasons of change, and I think both require courage. So today, I want to share the stories of two women. Emily Carr, a painter from Canada, and Eileen Duggan, a poet from New Zealand. And their creative lives were shaped by listening deeply to the world around them. One found her voice in the towering forests and sweeping skies of the Canadian landscape, and the others in clouds and cloisters, in silence and in prayer. And both, I believe, have something vital to teach us about the courage it takes to begin. So let's start with Emily Carr. She was born in 1871, and she painted forests and the spirit of the landscape. She was born in Victoria, British Columbia, at a time when women were rarely encouraged to pursue art, let alone embark on solitary journeys into remote landscapes. But Carr was a determined woman. She studied art in San Francisco, which again is unusual. And later she went to London and Paris. She encountered the post-impressionists and the Fauvist movements that would eventually shape her bold, expressive style. But when she returned to Canada, she was met with indifference and misunderstanding. Her work was perceived as strange. I mean, it was spiritual and deeply connected to the Indigenous art and wilderness of British Columbia, and it didn't seem to fit the conservative expectations of Canadian art at the time in the early 20th century. So, I've got lots of thoughts on that. Carr was fascinated by Indigenous culture and totemic carvings, which she documented and interpreted in her paintings. And though her work has since been critiqued through a post-colonial lens, and rightly so, she was, for her time, unusually respectful and deeply moved by what she saw and what she witnessed. She saw spiritual meaning in the land and the people who had lived in it long before settlers arrived. She was deeply interested in this. She often travelled alone with her dog, camping in forests and sketching in storms. And her notebooks are filled with these observations of moss and birds, of totems, of the wind. She suffered from ill health, and she was largely overlooked until about the 1920s, when she was rediscovered by members of the Group of Seven, who were a collective of male Canadian painters who celebrated the landscape. But even then, she remained somewhat on the margins, perceived as a eccentric, a mystic, a woman in a man's world. And yet, her vision endured. Her later paintings are filled with sweeping trees, clouds that seem to breathe, and this wonderful sense of movement, so powerful you can hear, you can almost hear the wind in them. She once wrote, "It is wonderful to feel the grandness of Canada in the raw, not because she is Canada, but because she's something sublime that you were born into, some great rugged power that you are part of." How amazing was that? Carr was a late bloomer. She didn't truly come into her artistic maturity until her 50s and 60s. So how reassuring is that for all of us that feel that time has slipped us by or that we've missed our moment? See, it's not true. It is never, ever too late to create. Today, Emily Carr's work is considered foundational to Canadian art, and her writing, especially Growing Pains, her autobiography, remains honest and funny and really quite profound. I recommend reading it. She reminds us that new beginnings can happen at any time in life, and that solitude, although it can be hard, can also be sacred. Let's move on to Eileen Duggan, born in 1894. The poet of quiet faith and landscape. So half a world away in the small town of Tuamarina in New Zealand, Eileen Duggan was born into a devout Irish Catholic family. Her life was marked by gentleness, privacy, and a deep connection to the land and her faith. But unlike Carr's wild and expressive visual world, Duggan's art was made of silence, of syllables placed with reverence. She became one of New Zealand's most celebrated poets during the 1930s and 40s, and yet she lived a quiet and almost reclusive life, working as a teacher and as a journalist, and later as a carer for her ailing sister. Duggan's poems speak of mountains, of rain, harvest, bird song, and spiritual longing. She didn't seek the limelight and in fact declined several major honours, including the Order of the British Empire, OBE. She once said that she feared false fame and that her poetry came not from ambition, but from something more interior, a need to serve, something greater than herself, which is really quite humbling, isn't it? Her language is restrained, but lyrical, shaped by classical rhythms and the Catholic liturgy. But there's nothing stuffy about her voice. She captures a sense of belonging, of being deeply rooted in time and place, and her poem, Autumn Rain, reflects on the hush and the hush again of falling leaves. And her poem Daybreak in the Mountains evokes this slow opening light, perfect images for those living through autumn or spring. Despite being a literary figure of her time, her name has faded a little bit from common knowledge, which I think is really sad, particularly outside of New Zealand. But her work endures in the way that rain endures, quietly nourishing those who take the time to pause and listen. That's my little metaphor for this week's Wednesday wandering. One line of hers that stays with me is this: "Let me be kind to the pain I see, and blind to the praise men give to me." Isn't that the kind of beginning the world needs right now? Carr and Duggan were in many ways opposites. One was a painter of movement and force, and the other a poet of stillness and reflection, and yet both responded to the world with an attentive presence. Both trusted in beginnings, even those really small ones. So as we step into April, I wonder what beginning is stirring in you. Here in Dorset, in southwest England, I've seen the first little daffodils open up by the coast path, leaning into the wind. Yeah, with impossible cheerfulness. They're just like, whoa! But I know that some of you are watching the leaves fall or gathering the last of the tomatoes before the chill sets in. Spring asks us to wake up. Autumn asks us to pay attention. Both ask us to begin again. My little creative prompt for you. This week I invite you to reflect on this question. What is quietly beginning in me? It might be something tiny, a flicker of an idea, a change in pace, a desire to create something that feels more you. Honour it, name it, give it space. Perhaps respond in your journal or make a sketch or a doodle. Let it be unfinished. Let it be enough. Emily Carr showed us how to walk into the forest with a wild heart and to paint what we feel. Eileen Duggan showed us how to sit by the window with folded hands and write what we hear in our hearts. We need both kinds of courage in this world, the loud and the quiet, the daring and the devout. So this April, whether you're surrounded by buds or falling leaves, may you begin again, gently, bravely, imperfectly. So until next week, keep wondering. My love to you. Bye-bye.